When I found the birth control pills in her bathroom, I never expected the truth would shatter my family. As I walked into the bathroom, something shiny on the floor caught my eye. The sunlight was reflecting off a small object that had landed on the rug. Being barefoot, I instinctively glanced down to make sure I wouldn't step on anything sharp. Vanessa hadn't mentioned dropping anything, but it wasn't uncommon to miss small items. What I found, however, wasn't just a stray button or earring. It was a tiny, circular piece of foil that had fallen from a pill blister pack, the kind used to seal in pills before they're pushed out. The small backing was easily overlooked, blending in almost perfectly with the carpet, but the sunlight had made it sparkle just enough for me to notice. I picked up the foil, studying it closely. One side was blank, and the other had a small marking that read 2. Since today was Wednesday, I assumed the number represented Tuesday's pill. The thought of a daily medication briefly crossed my mind, something that required consistent use, like birth control. But Vanessa wasn't supposed to be taking any medication, at least not any that I knew of. She hadn't mentioned anything, and both of us had just had our annual medical checkups a few months ago. We were both declared healthy, so what was this foil doing in our bathroom? It didn't take long before my thoughts spiraled into suspicion. Was Vanessa hiding a health issue from me? Had she been prescribed something she didn't want me to know about? The more I considered it, the more unlikely it seemed. If she had a medical condition, she would have told me, wouldn't she? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As my mind raced, the most disturbing thought crossed my mind. Birth control. Vanessa hadn't needed birth control for the past 2 years, ever since I'd had a vasectomy. We'd made the decision together after our second child, agreeing that we didn't want more kids. And while I'd always trusted her implicitly, this tiny piece of foil now raised questions I never thought I'd be asking. I stood in the bathroom for a few moments, holding the foil in my hand, trying to piece together why it would be here. My first instinct was to confront her, but I stopped myself. Confronting Vanessa without knowing the full story could lead to unnecessary conflict. I needed more information before jumping to any conclusions. I placed the foil in the trash and decided I would search for more clues. With Vanessa still in bed, I quietly began checking through the bathroom cabinets, careful not to make any noise. My heart pounded in my chest as I searched, unsure of what I was even looking for. After a few minutes of opening drawers and moving bottles around, I found what I feared most: the pills. They were hidden at the bottom of a tampon box, tucked inside an old aspirin bottle. When I opened the bottle, I saw the blister pack of birth control pills, the same kind Vanessa used to take before I had my vasectomy. My stomach churned as I looked at them. There was no doubt about it, Vanessa was taking birth control again. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The pills were undeniable proof that something was off, and my mind immediately went to the worst possible scenario. Infidelity? Why else would she need birth control if we couldn't have children? Was she seeing someone else? The thought made me feel physically sick. Vanessa and I had been together for 9 years. We met shortly after college when she was working as a personal assistant. We clicked almost immediately, and within a year of dating, we got married. We had 2 beautiful kids, James and Sonia, and up until now, I thought our life together was nearly perfect. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I co-owned a small engineering firm, and while Vanessa's salary as a Paul was modest, we had enough to provide a good life for our children. After Sonia was born, Vanessa had returned to work, even though her salary was almost entirely spent on the au pair we hired to help with the kids. She insisted that working gave her a sense of purpose and independence, and I had supported her decision. I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But now, holding this pack of pills, I wondered if she'd been lying to me all along. I placed the pills back where I found them and closed the cabinet. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were a blur. I had to think carefully before doing anything. Confronting Vanessa without knowing the full story could backfire. She might have a perfectly reasonable explanation, or she could lie to cover her tracks. Either way, I needed proof. At work that day, I couldn't focus on anything other than what I'd found. I kept replaying the scene in my head, imagining all the different scenarios. What if Vanessa was cheating? How long had it been going on? Who was she seeing? The questions tormented me, but there was one that scared me the most. Were James and Sonia even my children? The thought that they might not be mine sent a cold wave of panic through me. I loved my children more than anything, but now, for the first time, I doubted if they were truly mine. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. So, I made a decision. I would get DNA tests for the kids. I needed to know for sure before taking any drastic steps. That afternoon, I ordered DNA testing kits online and decided to take things one step further. If Vanessa was having an affair, I needed proof. So, along with the tests, I ordered a set of surveillance equipment, voice recorders, small hidden cameras, and a phone cloning device. It felt extreme, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I had to know the truth, no matter what it cost me. When the packages arrived at my office later that week, I felt a mix of dread and determination. That evening, I told Vanessa I needed to work late, but in reality, I was setting up the surveillance equipment at home. The AU pair was feeding the kids dinner when I arrived, so I let her handle it while I discreetly placed the cameras. I installed one in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in the bedroom, carefully positioning it to capture the bed. That night, while Vanessa showered, I placed voice recorders in her car and handbag, and I cloned her phone. I checked the clone device for any suspicious texts or calls, but nothing stood out. Either she was being incredibly careful, or there was nothing going on. I couldn't be sure yet, but I would soon have my answers. The weekend came and went, and everything seemed normal. Vanessa didn't act any differently, and we went about our usual family routines. But on Monday, after she left for work, I retrieved the footage from the cameras. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. The bathroom camera showed Vanessa taking the pills. She was definitely on birth control, even though she had no reason to be. But it was the footage from the bedroom that shook me to my core. On Saturday evening, while I was cooking dinner, Vanessa had taken a shower. The footage showed her sitting on the bed, using a phone I hadn't seen before. She was texting someone she didn't want me to know about. After sending a few messages, she opened the air conditioning vent and hid the phone inside before joining me for dinner. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Vanessa had a secret phone hidden away in the house. The fact that she needed to hide it was the clearest sign, yet that she was involved in something she didn't want me to know about. I immediately checked the vent when she was out of the house the next day, but the phone was gone. She must have taken it with her when she left. Now I was sure Vanessa was hiding something from me, I just didn't know exactly what. Later that night, after Vanessa had gone to bed, I retrieved the hidden phone from the vent and cloned it. It only took a few minutes to copy all the data. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back in its hiding spot. I returned to bed, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that everything would change once I looked at the contents of that phone. The next morning, I finally checked the cloned phone, and my entire world fell apart. The text on the phone confirmed everything. Vanessa had been having an affair with someone for months, maybe even longer. The messages between her and an unnamed person were explicit and intimate, detailing meetings and encounters that I had been blissfully unaware of. What hurt the most was that I was never mentioned in any of the messages. It was as if I didn't exist in her world. She had completely erased me from her life. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages. I felt numb, like I was watching someone else's life unravel before me. But this was my life, my marriage, and it was crumbling right in front of my eyes. I sat in my office, tears streaming down my face, as I tried to process everything. Vanessa had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. I wanted to confront her, to scream and demand answers, but I knew I needed to stay calm. I needed to be smart about this. There was too much at stake. Our children, our home, our entire life together. I took a deep breath and decided that before confronting Vanessa, I needed to confirm one more thing. I needed to know if James and Sonia were really my children. The DNA test results were due in a few days, and I couldn't move forward without that final piece of the puzzle. For the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. I went to work, came home, and played the part of the loving husband and father. Vanessa didn't suspect a thing. She carried on as usual, talking about her day and spending time with the kids, completely unaware that I knew her secret. When the DNA test results finally arrived, I was terrified to open them. I sat in my office, the envelope in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was ready to know the truth. The DNA results sat in my lap, their presence suffocating, though they weighed next to nothing. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as I contemplated whether to open the envelope. I wasn't ready, yet I knew I had to. My hands trembled as I ripped the seal, my eyes scanning the page inside, desperately searching for answers I both feared and needed. As the words on the page came into focus, my heart sank. Neither James nor Sonia was biologically mine. The test results showed that both children shared the same father, but it wasn't me. I sat frozen, unable to process the information. My mind reeled. These were my children. I had raised them, loved them, been their father in every sense of the word. Except one. How could this be? How could Vanessa have lied to me for so many years, allowing me to believe these children were mine? The pain of betrayal cut deeper than I had ever imagined possible. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the fact that my entire life, everything I had built with Vanessa, was based on a lie. The children I had tucked in every night, the ones who called me daddy and ran to me with their scraped knees and tear-streaked faces, weren't mine. They belonged to someone else, a stranger who had fathered them behind my back. I felt nauseous, my stomach turning as the realization hit me with full force. I'd been raising another man's children, and I hadn't even known it. My love for James and Sonia was real, and that made the betrayal hurt even more. How was I supposed to look at them now? How could I ever face them, knowing that the bond we shared wasn't what I thought it was? I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to think. It was like my world had been pulled out from under me, leaving nothing but a gaping void where my life used to be. The office door creaked open, and Michelle stepped inside. Her usual professional demeanor was softened by concern as she looked at me, instantly sensing that something was very wrong. "Gary?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Did the results come in?" I nodded, but couldn't bring myself to speak. Michelle walked over, her heels softly tapping on the office floor, and took a seat across from me. Without asking, she reached for the DNA results, and I handed them to her with trembling hands. She read them quickly, her face turning pale as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching across the desk to take my hand. "I can't even imagine how you're feeling right now." Her touch was warm and comforting, but it didn't alleviate the cold, empty pit that had formed in my chest. I felt hollow, as if everything that had once defined me had been stripped away. "What am I supposed to do?" I finally croaked out, my voice hoarse from holding back tears. "They're not mine, but they're my kids, they're my whole world, and now, I don't even know how to look at them." Michelle didn't respond right away. She simply sat there, holding my hand as I tried to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed my life. "You love them," she finally said, her voice steady. "That hasn't changed." "Yes, this is devastating, but no test result can erase the bond you have with James and Sonia. You're the only father they've ever known, and that means something." Her words were logical, but they didn't ease the pain. I knew she was right on some level, but that didn't change the fact that everything felt tainted now. The betrayal ran too deep for me to think clearly. "I don't even know if I can stay in the same house as Vanessa," I said, shaking my head. "She's been lying to me for 9 years, Michelle, 9 years, and all the while, I thought we had this perfect family." Michelle squeezed my hand tighter. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. Give yourself some time to process this. It's okay to feel angry. You have every right to be, but don't make any rash decisions." I nodded, even though my mind was racing. The idea of confronting Vanessa felt unbearable, but I knew it had to happen. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Later that evening, I made my way home, barely aware of the drive. I parked in the driveway, staring at the house that no longer felt like mine. Vanessa was inside, probably cooking dinner or helping the kids with their homework. How could she go on like nothing had happened? Like everything was fine? I stepped inside, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. The familiar smells of dinner cooking in the kitchen greeted me, but they no longer brought any comfort. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, smiling as though nothing was wrong. "Hey, you're home early," she said cheerfully. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. How was your day? For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, looking at her, trying to reconcile the woman I had loved for so many years with the one who had lied to me every day of our marriage. Finally, I found my voice. We need to talk. The smile faded from Vanessa's face. She could sense something was wrong, but she had no idea just how wrong. Sure, she said cautiously, stepping closer. What's going on? I walked past her into the living room, sitting down on the couch. Vanessa followed, looking increasingly uneasy. I got the DNA test results today, I said bluntly. Vanessa's eyes widened in shock, her face draining of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She simply stood there, frozen, as the weight of my words sank in. You did what? She finally stammered. I had DNA tests done for James and Sonia. I repeated, my voice cold and detached. They're not mine, Vanessa. You've been lying to me for 9 years. Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I was beyond that now. Gary, I can explain, she began, her voice trembling. I don't want your explanations, I snapped, cutting her off. I just want the truth. Why? Why would you do this to me? To us? Did you think I would never find out? Vanessa sank onto the couch beside me, her hands trembling in her lap. I never meant for it to happen like this, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I swear I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed bitterly, unable to believe what I was hearing. A mistake? 9 years, Vanessa, 9 years of lying to me, and you call it a mistake. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The anger inside me was too strong. I didn't know how to tell you, she sobbed. When I found out I was pregnant with James, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought about telling you the truth, but I was scared you would leave me. So, you decided to lie to me instead, I said, my voice laced with bitterness. Vanessa nodded, wiping her eyes. At first I thought I could keep it a secret forever, but as the years went on, it just got harder and harder to keep it from you. I didn't want to destroy our family. Our family? I repeated, incredulous. This isn't a family, Vanessa. It's a lie. Everything we've built is a lie. She looked at me with pleading eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's not a lie, Gary. I love you. I've always loved you. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I paced the room, trying to control the rage boiling inside me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have lied to me. You wouldn't have let me believe those kids were mine when you knew they weren't. Vanessa's tears fell harder as she buried her face in her hands again. I'm sorry, she whispered through her sobs. I'm so sorry. But her apology meant nothing to me. Not anymore. The damage was done, and no amount of tears or regret could undo it. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice trembling with emotion. I can't stay in this house with you. I need to leave. Vanessa looked up, panic flashing across her face. No, Gary, please. Don't go. We can work through this. We can fix this. But I shook my head. There's nothing left to fix, Vanessa. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to lie to me. I need time to think. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving Vanessa sobbing on the couch. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get out, to be alone with my thoughts. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind racing as I tried to process everything. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It all swirled inside me, making it impossible to think straight. Eventually, I found myself pulling into a small hotel parking lot on the outskirts of town. I checked into a room and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. Everything I thought I knew was gone. My wife, my children, my family. None of it was real. And now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had shattered beyond repair. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, the images of Vanessa's betrayal played over and over in my mind. The texts I had read, the pills I had found, the DNA results that had ripped my heart out. It was all too much to bear. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I couldn't be around Vanessa or the children, knowing what I knew. It wasn't fair to them, and it wasn't fair to me. I called Michelle, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "I need a lawyer," I said bluntly. "I'm filing for divorce." Michelle didn't ask any questions. She simply told me she'd make the arrangements and would have everything ready by the end of the day. I thanked her, knowing that this was the only way forward. As I hung up the phone, a deep sense of loss washed over me. This wasn't how my life was supposed to turn out. I had dreamed of growing old with Vanessa, of watching James and Sonia grow up, of being a family. But those dreams were gone now, replaced by a bitter reality I couldn't escape. I spent the next few hours at the hotel, numbly going through the motions of packing up my things and making arrangements to leave the house for good. There was no going back now. My marriage was over, and I had to start rebuilding my life from the ground up. When I finally returned home to gather my things, Vanessa was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Gary," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "There's nothing left to say," I said coldly. "I'm leaving. I'll send someone to get the rest of my things later." Vanessa broke down in tears again, but I felt nothing. The part of me that had once loved her was gone, replaced by an emptiness that no amount of tears could fill. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the life I had once thought was perfect, but was now nothing more than a lie. After leaving the house, I felt like a hollow shell. The place where I had spent the last 9 years building a life, creating memories with Vanessa and the children, was now just a reminder of everything that had been taken from me. I couldn't bear to stay there, not even for another minute. Every corner of that house was stained with lies, and no amount of time or effort could wash it clean. As I drove away, my mind raced through the whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, and the overwhelming feeling of loss. Michelle had arranged everything efficiently. Within a few hours, I had legal representation lined up, and the first steps toward filing for divorce were underway. My lawyer, Lorraine, was sharp and professional, and the moment I met her, I felt confident that she would handle the case well. There was no small talk, no unnecessary pleasantries. Just the facts, the legal process, and the strategy for moving forward. I appreciated her directness, even though I was still reeling from the weight of everything I had just uncovered. Sitting across from Lorraine in her office, I explained the situation as clearly as I could, though my voice shook with emotion. I told her about the DNA results, the secret phone, the hidden birth control pills, and how Vanessa had lied to me for nearly a decade. Lorraine listened carefully, her pen moving swiftly across the notepad as she documented every detail. "You're making the right decision," Lorraine said once I had finished. "We'll go after everything you're entitled to, especially given the nature of the betrayal. Infidelity is one thing, but falsifying birth records and deceiving you about the paternity of your children, that's a whole new level of dishonesty." The word children hit me hard, and I felt my throat tighten. I'd spent years loving James and Sonia, raising them as my own, and now the very foundation of that relationship had been shattered. They weren't mine, at least not biologically, but how could I just walk away from them? How could I turn my back on the two little people who had depended on me, who had no idea what was going on? "I don't know what to do about James and Sonia," I admitted. "They're not mine, but I love them. I can't just abandon them." Lorraine nodded sympathetically. "It's understandable. This is one of the most difficult parts of situations like this. While the DNA results prove they're not biologically yours, the emotional bond is still there. The court will likely take that into consideration when it comes to custody, but ultimately, it's up to you to decide how involved you want to be in their lives going forward." Her words weighed heavily on me. I had to make a decision, and it wasn't going to be easy. There was no right answer. If I chose to stay involved in their lives, I would have to face Vanessa and be reminded of her betrayal every time I saw them. But if I walked away, I would lose the children forever. Children who still thought of me as their father. "I need some time to think," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "I can't make that decision right now." "Take all the time you need," Lorraine said, her tone gentle but firm. "This is a life-changing situation, and you deserve space to process it. In the meantime, I'll move forward with the divorce proceedings." We'll make sure everything is handled as smoothly as possible, and we'll protect your assets. You're in good hands." I thanked her and left the office, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized that I had no idea where I was going. I couldn't go back to the house, and the idea of staying in a hotel indefinitely wasn't appealing. I needed some kind of stability, something to hold on to in the midst of this chaos. That's when I remembered Michelle's offer. She had told me I could stay at her place if I needed somewhere to go, and I had brushed it off at the time, thinking I wouldn't need it. But now, with nowhere else to turn, her offer seemed like a lifeline. I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang only once before she picked up. "Gary," she answered, her voice filled with concern. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I'm not okay. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then Michelle's voice softened. "Come to my place. I've got a spare room, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need. You shouldn't be alone right now." I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should accept her offer. But the truth was, I didn't want to be alone. I didn't trust myself to handle everything that was happening without some kind of support. So I agreed, thanking her for the kindness she had shown me throughout this ordeal. When I arrived at Michelle's house, she greeted me with a warm hug, and for the first time in days, I felt a tiny bit of comfort. Her home was modest but cozy, with soft lighting and a peaceful atmosphere that immediately put me at ease. She showed me to the spare room, where she had already made up the bed and placed fresh towels on the dresser. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said, smiling gently. "There's no rush." I nodded, grateful beyond words, and sank onto the bed, feeling exhausted both mentally and physically. Michelle left me to settle in, and I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. The weight of the situation was overwhelming, but at least for now I had a place to stay, a temporary refuge from the storm. Over the next few days, I fell into a strange, surreal routine. I would wake up early, my mind racing with thoughts about the children, about Vanessa, about the divorce. Michelle and I would have breakfast together, her presence a quiet source of support, and then I would spend the rest of the day dealing with the legalities of the situation, meeting with Lorraine, gathering documents, and sorting through the financials of the impending divorce. It was emotionally draining, but Michelle was always there, offering a listening ear when I needed to vent, or a comforting word when the stress became too much. I hadn't expected to lean on her so much, but her kindness had been a balm to my frayed nerves. One evening, as we sat in the living room after dinner, I finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at me since the DNA results came in. "Do you think I should fight for custody of the kids?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michelle looked at me thoughtfully, setting down her glass of wine. "That's a tough question," she said gently. "Only you can really answer that, but I do know one thing, you love them, and that matters. Even if they're not biologically yours, you've been their father for years. That bond doesn't just disappear." I nodded, trying to hold back the flood of emotions that rose to the surface whenever I thought about James and Sonia. "I just don't know if I can handle seeing Vanessa all the time," I admitted. "Every time I look at her, I'll be reminded of the betrayal. How can I raise those kids when I can't even stand to be in the same room as her?" Michelle reached across the couch and placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," she said softly. "Give yourself some time. You've been through so much already. It's okay to take a step back and figure out what's best for you." Her words gave me some comfort, but I knew that eventually I would have to make a choice. For now, though, I was content to let things unfold slowly. The divorce process was already in motion, and I knew that once that was settled, I would have a clearer picture of what the future held. As the weeks went by, I found myself growing closer to Michelle in ways I hadn't anticipated. She had always been a trusted colleague, someone I respected and admired, but now, as she opened her home and her heart to me during one of the darkest times of my life, I saw a different side of her. She was kind, compassionate, and strong, and I couldn't deny the connection that was forming between us. It started small, an extra smile here, a lingering glance there, but over time, it became something more. We spent more and more time together, sharing our thoughts and fears late into the night. She was always there to listen, to offer advice, and to help me through the emotional turmoil of the divorce. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, watching a movie in comfortable silence, I realized that my feelings for Michelle had shifted. It wasn't just gratitude for her support or admiration for her strength. It was something deeper, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked over at her, the soft glow of the TV casting shadows on her face, and I felt my heart ache with a mix of confusion and longing. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, if I could even allow myself to feel something for someone else after everything that had happened, but there was no denying it anymore. Michelle had become more than just a friend, more than just someone helping me through a difficult time. She must have sensed my gaze, because she turned to look at me, her eyes filled with an unspoken question. For a moment we just stared at each other, the air between us thick with tension. Then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in and kissed her. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if we were both testing the waters, but as her lips responded to mine, the kiss deepened, and all the confusion and uncertainty melted away. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger or pain. I felt hope. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, Michelle smiled at me, her eyes shining. "I wasn't sure if you were ready for this," she whispered. "I don't know if I am," I admitted, "but I can't deny what I feel." We spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and sharing more about our lives than we ever had before. It was strange, but in some ways it felt right, like a fresh start, a new chapter in my life after everything that had happened, but the guilt lingered. As much as I wanted to move forward with Michelle, the thought of Vanessa and the children still haunted me. The divorce was progressing smoothly, and Lorraine was handling everything on the legal side, but the emotional scars were far from healed. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Lorraine, meeting scheduled with Vanessa's lawyer for Friday. Custody arrangements will be discussed. Let me know if you want to proceed with shared custody or if you want to pursue another arrangement. My stomach tightened as I read the message. I had been avoiding this decision for too long, and now I had to face it head-on. Michelle must have noticed my change in demeanor because she looked over at me from across the breakfast table, concern etched on her face. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. I sighed, setting down my phone. "It's time to make a decision about the kids. Lorraine wants to know if I want to pursue custody or not." Michelle nodded, understanding the weight of the situation. "What do you think you'll do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to walk away and start fresh, but they're still my kids, you know? I can't just forget about them." She reached across the table and took my hand in hers, offering me the silent support I had come to rely on. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here," she said softly. "But remember, you don't have to do this alone." Her words gave me strength, and for the first time, I felt like I could face the decision without being overwhelmed by guilt or fear. That Friday, I walked into Lorraine's office with a clear head. Vanessa's lawyer was already there, and Vanessa sat beside him, looking as nervous as I felt. I took a deep breath and sat down across from them, ready to finally put everything on the table. "Let's talk custody," Lorraine began, her voice steady as she led the conversation. "Gary, have you made a decision regarding the children?" I looked over at Vanessa, her eyes pleading with me to do what was right for James and Sonia. The anger I had felt toward her was still there, but it was no longer the driving force behind my decisions. I had come to realize that, despite everything, I still cared about the kids. They were innocent in all of this, and they deserved to have a father in their lives. "I want shared custody," I said finally, my voice firm. "I may not be their biological father, but I'm still their dad. I can't just walk away from that." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, relief washing over her face. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for James and Sonia. They were the only real family I had left, and I wasn't going to let them down. The meeting ended amicably, with both sides agreeing to work out the details of the shared custody arrangement. As I walked out of the office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life again. Michelle was waiting for me outside, her face lighting up when she saw me. I walked over to her, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "How did it go?" she asked, slipping her hand into mine. I smiled, feeling more at ease than I had in weeks. "It went well. I'm going to be a part of the kids' lives. It's not going to be easy, but I'm ready." Michelle squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride. "I knew you'd make the right decision." As we walked away from the office together, Hand in hand, I realized that, despite all the pain and betrayal I had endured, I was still standing. Life hadn't turned out the way I had imagined. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something new, something better. And with Michelle by my side, I knew I wouldn't have to face it alone. As I settled into the new rhythm of my life, there was still a part of me that remained tangled in the past, like a stubborn knot that refused to unravel. The shared custody arrangement had been finalized, and I was now seeing James and Sonia regularly. Every time I picked them up from Vanessa's place, it was like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Yet, despite the painful reminders, seeing the kids grounded me. They were innocent in all of this, and they deserved stability, love, and a future where their lives weren't torn apart by the mistakes of the adults around them. The mornings with James and Sonia became the moments I looked forward to most. I would take them to the park, or to breakfast at their favorite diner, or we would just hang out at home, playing board games or watching movies. These small mundane activities anchored me, and slowly, I began to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Sonia, with her bright curiosity, always had 1,000 questions about everything. James, quieter, but no less thoughtful, stuck close by, silently absorbing everything with those wide, serious eyes of his. Every time I looked at them, a part of me ached with the knowledge that they weren't biologically mine, but that feeling didn't diminish the love I had for them. They were my kids, no matter what a piece of paper or a DNA test said. Vanessa, on the other hand, had become more of a shadow in my life. We spoke only when necessary, sticking to discussions about the children and avoiding the messy, unresolved emotions between us. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't ready to forgive her. Perhaps I never would. She had shattered our marriage, and I couldn't bring myself to reconcile the person I thought she was with the person she had revealed herself to be. Still, we kept things civil for the sake of the kids, and that was enough for now. Despite the complications with Vanessa, my relationship with Michelle continued to deepen. What had started as her providing a safe space for me in the chaos of my life had blossomed into something more, something real. There was a warmth and honesty to Michelle that I hadn't realized I'd been missing in my marriage. She was direct kind, and never made me feel like I had to hide any part of myself. She saw me at my worst, and instead of turning away, she stayed. Over time, what I felt for her grew from gratitude into love, though it took me a while to fully admit it, even to myself. Michelle and I didn't rush anything. There were no grand declarations of love or dramatic moments of passion, just a quiet, steady progression as we spent more time together. Our connection felt natural, unforced, like two puzzle pieces that fit together without any jagged edges. We continued to share meals, laugh together, and support each other through the ups and downs of life. And in those moments I realized that this, whatever it was, might be the kind of relationship I had always been searching for. One evening, a few months after the divorce had been finalized, Michelle and I were sitting on the back porch of her house, sipping wine as the sun set. The air was cool, the sky streaked with shades of pink and orange, and everything felt peaceful in a way that I hadn't experienced in a long time. We had just finished dinner, a simple meal we had cooked together, and now we were enjoying the quiet. I've been thinking, I began, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Michelle looked over at me, her eyes curious but calm, waiting for me to continue. About us, about where we are, and where we're going. She didn't respond immediately, but I could see the flicker of anticipation in her eyes. "And what are you thinking?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. I know it hasn't been that long since the divorce, and I'm still figuring out a lot of things. But I'm sure about this. I'm sure about you. I don't want to keep tiptoeing around it anymore. I love you, Michelle. The words hung in the air for a moment, and I realized how long I had been holding them back. Michelle's face softened, and a slow, radiant smile spread across her lips. "I love you too, Gary," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I've been waiting for you to say that." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, relief and happiness flooding through me. In that moment, everything felt right. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was looking forward to the future instead of dreading it. Michelle leaned over, pressing a soft kiss to my lips, and I pulled her closer, wrapping my arms around her. The sun dipped lower behind the horizon, casting the world in a golden glow, and for once, I allowed myself to believe that things could be good again, that I could have a second chance at happiness. The following months were a delicate balancing act. Navigating the new relationship with Michelle while maintaining my role in James and Sonia's lives was a challenge, but it was one I was willing to face. The kids had adjusted surprisingly well to the new custody arrangement, though there were still difficult moments. James, especially, had become more introspective since the divorce, and I often found myself worrying about how he was coping internally. Sonia, on the other hand, remained her lively, inquisitive self, seemingly unaffected by the tension between her parents. Vanessa and I kept our interactions brief, sticking to logistics: who would pick the kids up, who would take them to their activities, and how we would handle holidays. We never discussed the past, never delved into the emotions that still lingered just beneath the surface. It was easier that way. There was no going back, no repairing the damage that had been done, so we focused on moving forward separately. Michelle was patient with me during this transition. She never pushed me to introduce her to the kids or to define our relationship publicly, understanding that I needed time to sort things out. But as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that she was becoming a permanent part of my life, and eventually I knew I would have to tell James and Sonia about her. The opportunity came one weekend when I had the kids for an extended stay. We were having breakfast at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the windows, when Sonia, with her usual candor, brought up the subject. "Dad," she said between bites of her cereal, "do you have a girlfriend?" I nearly choked on my coffee, caught completely off guard. "Why do you ask that?" I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Sonia shrugged, completely unfazed. "I heard Mommy talking about it on the phone. She said you might be seeing someone." I glanced over at James, who was quietly watching the conversation unfold, his expression unreadable. I had known this moment would come eventually, but I hadn't expected it to happen so soon, and certainly not over breakfast. "Well," I began, setting my mug down, "there is someone I've been spending a lot of time with. Her name is Michelle, and she's very important to me." Sonia's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Is she nice? Can we meet her?" I hesitated, glancing at James to gauge his reaction. He was still quiet, his brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't seem upset, just contemplative. "Yes, she's very nice," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I'd like for you both to meet her when you're ready, but only when you feel comfortable with it." Sonia nodded enthusiastically, clearly excited by the prospect. James, however, remained silent for a moment longer before finally speaking. "Does this mean you're not getting back together with Mom?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. The question hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I had known it was coming. I had hoped that by now, James had come to terms with the reality of the situation, but hearing him ask it so plainly reminded me that for a child, these kinds of changes were never easy to accept. "No, buddy," I said gently, leaning forward to meet his gaze. "Your mom and I aren't getting back together, but that doesn't change how much we both love you and your sister. You'll always have both of us in your lives, no matter what." James nodded slowly, processing my words. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, but there was also quiet understanding. He was growing up, and part of that meant learning that not everything could go back to the way it was. "I want to meet Michelle," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, relieved and touched by his openness. "Okay," I said, "we'll plan something soon." A few weeks later, I arranged for the kids to meet Michelle. We decided to keep it casual, a day at the park, followed by lunch at a nearby cafe. I was nervous, unsure of how the kids would react to seeing me with someone new, but Michelle's calm, reassuring presence put me at ease. She had always been good with people, and I had no doubt she would handle this situation with the same grace she had shown throughout our relationship. When we arrived at the park, Sonia ran ahead, excited to explore the playground. James, as usual, stayed close to my side, his eyes scanning the park as if taking in every detail. "There she is," I said, pointing toward a bench where Michelle was waiting for us. She stood up as we approached, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Hi, you must be James and Sonia," she said, crouching down to their level. "I've heard so much about you." Sonia, ever the social butterfly, immediately took to Michelle, chatting animatedly about her favorite games, and asking if she wanted to go on the swings. James, on the other hand, was more reserved, but he offered Michelle a polite smile and a quiet hello. As the afternoon went on, I watched in awe as Michelle seamlessly integrated herself into our little family. She pushed Sonia on the swings, engaged James in a game of catch, and even managed to get him to open up about his favorite books. By the time we sat down for lunch, both kids were laughing and talking with her, as if they had known her for years. It was a relief, a huge weight off my shoulders to see the kids accepting Michelle so easily. I had been worried about how they would react, especially James, but it seemed that their curiosity and openness had won out over any lingering fears or doubts. Later, as we walked back to the car, Sonia took Michelle's hand without hesitation, while James walked alongside me, his usual quiet self. "I like her," Sonia declared with a wide grin. "She's fun." I glanced over at James, waiting for his response. He was silent for a moment, then he looked up at me and said, "Yeah, she's cool." It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to me. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like things were falling into place. My relationship with Michelle was becoming a stable, positive part of my life, and the kids seemed to be adjusting well to the new dynamic. As the weeks turned into months, we continued to navigate the complexities of blended family life. Michelle became more involved in the kids' lives, and they grew increasingly comfortable with her presence. We spent weekends together, went on trips to the zoo or the movies, and even had a few family dinners where the four of us sat around the table, laughing and talking like any other family. Of course, there were still challenges. Co-parenting with Vanessa wasn't always easy, especially when it came to coordinating schedules and making decisions about the kids' education and activities. But for the most part, we managed to keep things civil and focused on what was best for James and Sonia. One evening, after we had put the kids to bed, Michelle and I sat on the couch, reflecting on how far we had come. "Did you ever think things would turn out like this?" I asked, looking over at her with a smile. She shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "No, I didn't, but I'm glad they did." I leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Me too." As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey that had led me here. It hadn't been easy, far from it. I'd experienced heartbreak, betrayal, and loss that had nearly broken me. But in the midst of all that pain, I had found something new, something stronger. I'd found a family, a future, and a partner who loved me for who I was, flaws and all. And for the first time in a long while, I knew that everything was going to be okay. As time passed, life began to take on a new normal. The rhythm of shared custody, my evolving relationship with Michelle, and the quiet moments of healing gradually shaped the future I hadn't imagined when everything first fell apart. But despite the steady march forward, there were still challenges, small, sometimes sharp reminders that nothing was ever truly simple in the aftermath of betrayal and heartbreak. James and Sonia had adjusted well to the shared custody arrangement, but there were days when I could see the confusion and sadness in their eyes, especially in James. He was older, more aware of the complexities surrounding our family. Although I had explained to him, in the simplest terms, why his mom and I were no longer together, I knew he was still grappling with it in his own way. Sonia, on the other hand, seemed to bounce back with the resilience only children possess. She loved spending time with Michelle, treating her as a fun, cool adult in her life, but for James, the world hadn't fully righted itself yet. One particular day stood out when James asked a question that had been hanging in the air, unspoken, for months. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were sitting in the backyard throwing a baseball back and forth. The sun was warm on our faces, and the sound of birds chirping in the trees filled the quiet between us. James had been quieter than usual that day, his throws a little slower, his brow furrowed in thought. "Dad," he finally said, his voice serious in that way that only an 11-year-old could muster. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, buddy," I replied, tossing the ball back to him. He caught it, then hesitated, squeezing the baseball between his hands. "Do you miss Mom?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to ask that. Not now, not after so many months had passed since the divorce. But I knew this wasn't just a casual question for him. He was searching for answers, trying to understand something far more complex than I had anticipated. I lowered my glove and sat down on the grass, motioning for him to do the same. He joined me, his face set in that determined expression he always wore when he was trying to work through something difficult. "I miss the family we used to have," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I miss some of the good times we had together." But things weren't working between your mom and me for a long time, and sometimes, even though it's hard, it's better for people to go their separate ways. James looked down at the ball in his hands, rolling it between his fingers. But why couldn't you fix it? Why didn't you try harder? His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course, from his perspective, everything must have seemed so simple, so fixable. How could I explain to him the layers of betrayal, the lies, and the heartbreak without shattering his image of his mother? I had made a conscious decision not to tell the kids about the full extent of what had happened. They didn't need to know about the affair, about the deception, about the DNA results. That burden wasn't theirs to carry. I did try, I said, keeping my voice steady. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, things don't work out the way you want them to. Your mom and I care about you and Sonia more than anything, and that will never change. But we realized that we weren't happy together anymore, and staying in an unhappy marriage wouldn't have been fair to any of us. James was quiet for a long time, absorbing what I had said. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and acceptance. "Do you think you'll ever love her again?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I felt my heart tighten, but I knew I had to be honest with him. "No, James," I said gently. "I'll always care about her because she's your mom, but I don't love her the way I used to. And that's okay. People change, and relationships change. But that doesn't mean I won't always love you and Sonia." He nodded, though I could see the sadness still lingered in his eyes. I placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "You know, it's okay to miss the way things used to be," I added. "It's okay to feel sad or confused. This has been hard for all of us, but we're going to be okay. We're building a new kind of family, and that doesn't take away from the love we all have for each other." James didn't say anything more after that, but I could tell he was thinking deeply. I knew it would take time for him to fully come to terms with everything, and I would be there for him, as his father, every step of the way. As the months continued to pass, Michelle became an even more integral part of my life and the lives of the kids. Slowly but surely, she was becoming more than just Dad's girlfriend. The bond she formed with Sonia grew particularly strong, and I often found them giggling together over some inside joke or working on a craft project at the kitchen table. Sonia adored Michelle, and it was clear that Michelle cherished her just as much. But there was one night that changed the dynamic of our relationship even further. A night when I realized that my future with Michelle was no longer just a possibility, but a certainty. It was a warm summer evening, and Michelle and I had just put the kids to bed after a day spent at the beach. Sonia had fallen asleep almost immediately, exhausted from swimming and playing in the sand. James had stayed up a little later, reading a book before finally drifting off. Michelle and I were sitting on the porch, the soft hum of cicadas filling the air, a cool breeze rustling through the trees. We hadn't said much, content to simply enjoy the peaceful silence that had settled over the house. But as the night wore on, I felt a shift, an unspoken understanding that something was about to change between us. "I've been thinking," Michelle said, breaking the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "About what?" I asked, turning to look at her. She smiled, her eyes soft as they met mine. "About us. About this." She gestured to the house, to the kids' bedrooms inside, to everything we had built together over the past few months. "I love what we have, Gary. I love being part of your life and part of the kids' lives. But I want to know, are we moving forward? Do you see a future for us? Because I do. And I need to know if we're on the same page." Her words hung in the air between us, filled with a vulnerability that took me by surprise. I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the fear that maybe I wasn't ready to take the next step. But the truth was, I had been thinking about this too, about what it meant for us, for the kids, for the life we were building together. I reached over and took her hand, lacing my fingers with hers. "I love you, Michelle," I said softly. "And yes, I see a future with you. I've known that for a while now, but I didn't want to rush things. I wanted to make sure that we were both ready." Michelle smiled, her face lighting up with relief. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. "I've been ready." I smiled back, feeling a sense of certainty settle over me. "Then let's do this," I said. "Let's move forward. Let's build a life together." It was as simple as that. No grand proposal, no over-the-top gestures. Just two people deciding together that they wanted to spend their lives with each other. As the weeks passed, Michelle and I began to make plans for the future. Small steps at first, like moving in together and making adjustments to accommodate the kids. She moved into my place, and we began the delicate process of blending our lives more fully. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension, moments when the reality of blending two families hit harder than either of us had anticipated. But through it all, we remained committed to each other, to the kids, and to the life we were creating. Vanessa was surprisingly supportive of the transition, though there were moments when I could sense her discomfort. It couldn't have been easy for her to see Michelle becoming a significant part of the kids' lives, but to her credit, she never let it interfere with co-parenting. We kept things civil, and over time, the tension between us began to ease, though I doubted it would ever fully disappear. For the first time in what felt like years, I was genuinely happy. Happy with my life, happy with my family, happy with the direction things were heading. I had thought after the divorce that I would never feel this way again, that the betrayal had broken something in me that could never be fixed. But Michelle had shown me that there was still hope, still love to be found, even after everything. One weekend, a little over a year after the divorce, we planned a camping trip with the kids. It was something James had been asking for since summer began, and we figured it was the perfect opportunity to spend some quality time together as a family. We packed up the car with tents, sleeping bags, and enough food to last us the weekend and headed out to a nearby national park. The campsite was nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, and as soon as we arrived, the kids burst out of the car, excitedly exploring their surroundings. Michelle and I set up the tents while they ran around, collecting rocks and sticks for the campfire we would build later. That evening, as the sun set behind the trees and the fire crackled in the pit, we all sat around, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Sonia, ever the storyteller, made up an elaborate tale about a magical forest filled with talking animals, while James listened quietly, occasionally chiming in with a question or a suggestion. As I sat there, watching the flames dance and listening to the sound of my kids' laughter, I realized just how far we had come. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment, this feeling of peace, of contentment. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was better in so many ways. After the kids went to bed, Michelle and I sat by the fire, the night quiet and still around us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we watched the embers glow softly in the darkness. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked after a while, her voice thoughtful. "Sometimes I admit it, but I try not to dwell on it. The past is the past. What matters is what we have now." She nodded, her fingers tracing small patterns on my arm. "I'm glad we found each other," she said softly. "I'm glad we made it through everything." I smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Me too." As we sat there, the fire slowly dying down, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. A feeling that, despite everything that had happened, we were exactly where we were meant to be.